What happens when winning becomes so easy that it destroys you? When being the best at something actually guarantees your downfall? Right now, the world's second largest economy is discovering the answer to that question the hard way. And what's happening there is about to change everything you thought you knew about success, competition, and how empires crumble. If you want to understand where money really comes from and where it disappears to, hit that subscribe button right now. Because on this channel, we dig up the financial secrets that shaped our world. This is Monetary Archaeologist. Let's uncover the truth. Picture this, a factory floor that stretches as far as you can see. Machines humming 24 hours a day. Workers moving in perfect rhythm. Products rolling off assembly lines so fast they blur. And every single day, the price tag gets a little bit smaller. For almost 40 years, this was China's superpower. They could make anything cheaper than anyone else, faster than anyone else, in bigger quantities than anyone else. If you wanted something manufactured, you went to China. There was no second choice. They had won the game of global production so completely that everyone else just stopped playing. American factories closed. European manufacturers gave up. Entire industries packed their bags and moved east because competing was pointless. China had cracked the code. They'd figured out how to turn 1 billion people into the most efficient economic machine the world had ever seen. Except there was a problem, a big one, and nobody saw it coming. Let's go back to where this all started. The year is 1978. China is poor, really poor. Most people are farmers. The cities are gray and quiet. The economy is controlled by the government, and it's not working. People are hungry, angry, desperate for change. Then a man named Deng Xiaoping steps up and says something shocking. He tells the Communist Party that making money isn't evil, that getting rich is actually good for the country, that China needs to open its doors and let capitalism in. Now, you have to understand, this was radical. This was like telling a vegan convention to open a steakhouse. But Deng wasn't stupid. He'd seen the future, and the future was money. So China created special zones, little pockets where the rules were different, where foreign companies could build factories, where people could start businesses without asking permission from Beijing. And oh man, did it work! Within 10 years, sleepy fishing villages turned into megacities. Shenzhen went from 30,000 people to millions. Cranes filled the skyline. Highways appeared overnight. Ports expanded so fast you could watch them grow. Foreign investors couldn't sign contracts fast enough. Japan came first, then America, then Europe. Everyone wanted in, because China offered something no one else could match. Workers who'd do the job for a fraction of Western wages, and a government that would bend over backwards to make deals happen. By the year 2000, China wasn't just growing, it was exploding. Every province wanted its own boom. Every city wanted to be the next success story. So local governments started competing with each other. They'd offer cheaper land, lower taxes, easier permits, anything to attract more factories. And it worked. Boy, did it work. Pretty soon, if something could be made, it was made in China. Clothes, electronics, toys, furniture, machinery, everything. The phrase "made in China" went from rare to everywhere. Western consumers loved it. You could buy a shirt for $5, a smartphone for $300. Everything felt abundant and cheap. China was getting rich, and the rest of the world was getting stuff. Win-win, right? Well, not exactly. Here's where things get interesting. See, China's success wasn't built on being smarter or more innovative. It was built on being cheaper. And when your whole economy depends on being cheaper than anyone else, you create a very dangerous game. Because there's always someone willing to go cheaper. Local governments competed by cutting prices. Factories competed by cutting corners. Workers competed by accepting lower wages. Everyone was racing in the same direction, down. But for a while, it didn't matter. The machine was too powerful. Millions of people flooded in from the countryside every year, all willing to work 12-hour shifts for pennies. The factories never stopped. The ports never slept. China became the factory of the world. And then something shifted. By 2015, China wasn't just making a lot of steel. They were making more steel than every other country on Earth combined. Not because the world needed that much steel, but because the system couldn't stop. You see, local governments had borrowed huge amounts of money to build all those factories. And the only way to pay back those loans was to keep growing. So they built even more factories, which produced even more stuff, which drove prices down even further. Factories stopped making profit, but they didn't slow down, they sped up. Because in China's system, stopping meant failure, and failure meant shame. So everyone kept producing, hoping that selling more volume would make up for earning less per item. It didn't. Prices kept falling, profits kept shrinking, and a new word started appearing in Chinese business circles: involution. Involution is a fascinating concept. It means working harder and harder for less and less reward. Imagine running faster on a treadmill that keeps speeding up, but you never actually get anywhere. At first, people used this word to describe students and office workers, kids studying 18 hours a day just to get into college, employees working themselves to exhaustion for jobs that barely paid more than before. But then it spread to the entire economy. Companies started producing more and more, earning less and less. They weren't innovating, they weren't improving, they were just grinding. Take solar panels. China has dozens of companies making solar panels. In 2023, they produced twice as many panels as the entire world needed. Twice. So what happened to prices? They collapsed, dropped by 40% in 1 year. Companies were selling panels below the cost of making them, just to move inventory, just to stay alive. Dozens of smaller firms went bankrupt, but the big ones? They kept producing, because their local governments needed the jobs, needed the output numbers, needed something to point to and say, see, we're still growing. Now look at electric cars. China has over 100 brands making electric vehicles, 100, all fighting over the same shrinking pool of customers, all cutting prices to survive. The result? In the first half of 2024, industrial profits in China dropped by more than 20%. 20%! Even though they were exporting more than ever. Think about that. Chinese factories are making more stuff, selling more stuff, shipping more stuff around the world than at any point in history, and they're earning less money than before. That's not success. That's a slow-motion catastrophe. Now here's where it gets even more complex. Some of this isn't an accident. Some of this is actually the plan. China's government has learned how to use cheapness as a weapon. They subsidize key industries, give them cheap loans, tax breaks, land deals, all so these companies can sell products below cost. Why would they do that? Strategy. If you can keep your prices low long enough, your competitors go out of business. Western companies can't compete because they have shareholders demanding profits, so they fold, they give up, and once they're gone, China controls the market. It's the same playbook they used with steel, with shipbuilding, with rare earth metals. Flood the market, undercut everyone, wait, and once the world depends on you, you can raise prices and dictate terms. In theory, it's brilliant. In practice, it's draining China dry. Because there's a limit to how long you can lose money, even strategically, before the whole system starts to crack. Every dollar spent keeping failing factories alive today is borrowed from tomorrow, and someone, eventually, has to pay the bill. Here's the thing about China's economy that most people don't understand. It's not just about making money. It's about staying in power. The Communist Party made a deal with the Chinese people decades ago. The deal was simple. We'll make you richer, and you won't ask too many questions about how we run things. As long as the economy grows, the deal holds. But if growth stops, the deal breaks. So growth isn't optional, it's survival. That's why local governments keep building factories even when there's overcapacity. That's why banks keep giving loans to companies that can't repay them. That's why nobody dares to pump the brakes. Because if the machine stops, the entire system is at risk. Production isn't just economic, it's political.
It's proof that the system works, that the party is delivering, that the miracle continues. But here's the problem. The miracle isn't creating wealth anymore. It's just creating motion. Factories producing goods nobody's buying, at prices that don't cover costs, funded by loans that'll never get repaid, all to keep up the appearance that everything's fine. It's a treadmill, and everyone's too scared to step off. And this isn't just China's problem anymore. It's everyone's. Because when China floods the world with cheap goods, it keeps global prices low. Which sounds great, right? Who doesn't love a bargain? But here's the catch. Those cheap goods destroy industries everywhere else. American factories can't compete. European manufacturers close.
Developing countries can't build their own industries because Chinese imports are too cheap to beat. The whole world becomes dependent on Chinese production. And when Chinese production is built on a foundation of debt, subsidies, and falling profits, that's a very shaky foundation for the global economy. We've seen this pattern before in history. Britain's coal industry once flooded global markets so aggressively that even British miners couldn't make a living. The solution? Colonies. Captive markets to absorb the excess. Japan in the 1980s hit a similar wall. Overcapacity, deflation, an economy that kept producing but couldn't generate enough demand. They called it the lost decade. It lasted 30 years. Even Rome fell into this trap. Massive estates worked by slaves produced so much grain that prices collapsed. Small farmers went bankrupt. The backbone of the republic crumbled. Rome literally fed itself to death. Every empire that masters efficiency eventually faces the same test. Can you stop optimizing long enough to survive? China's trying to answer that question right now. Beijing knows there's a problem. They talk constantly about rebalancing, about shifting from an investment-driven economy to a consumption-driven one, about innovation instead of imitation. But talk is easy. Change is hard. Because while the central government is trying to steer the ship in a new direction, every province is still doing what it's always done: building more, producing more, borrowing more. The incentives haven't changed. Local officials still get promoted based on growth numbers. Banks still lend based on output. Success is still measured in volume, not value. It's like trying to lose weight while someone keeps filling your plate. And here's the cruel irony. Many of the products China is overproducing are things the world actually needs. Solar panels, batteries, electric vehicles, the tools of the green energy transition. But when you make so many that prices collapse and companies fail, even good ideas become disasters. China has mastered production, but it's forgotten balance. And an economy without balance is like a tower without a foundation. It can grow very tall, but eventually, gravity wins. So what's the lesson here? It's not that efficiency is bad. It's that efficiency without purpose is destruction. China turned competition into an art form. They squeezed every advantage, cut every corner, optimized every process. And in doing so, they created an economy that can't afford to stop, can't afford to rest, and can't afford to ask whether all this production actually creates prosperity. Because the answer is increasingly, it doesn't. When factories make goods they can't sell at a profit, that's not productivity, that's waste. When companies survive only because governments keep them on life support, that's not capitalism, that's theater. When an entire economy runs on the fumes of yesterday's miracle, hoping momentum can substitute for meaning, that's not growth. That's the slow unwinding of an empire that won too completely. The tragedy isn't that China failed, it's that China succeeded too well. They became so good at being cheap that cheap became worthless. And now they're trapped. Trapped by their own efficiency. Trapped by their own success. Trapped in a system where everyone is running faster just to stay in place. This is what happens when the race to the bottom becomes the only race in town. Nobody wins. Not the companies, not the workers, not even the government. Because in the end, a victory built on collapse isn't a victory at all. It's just collapse in slow motion. China's story isn't over, not by a long shot, but the chapter of unstoppable growth, that one, closing.
What comes next will determine not just China's future, but the shape of the global economy for decades to come. Because if the world's factory can't make money anymore, what happens to the world? That's the question hanging over markets, governments, and boardrooms right now. And nobody has a good answer. But here's what we know for sure. Empires don't collapse because they're weak. They collapse because they're too strong in the wrong ways. Because they optimize for survival instead of thriving. Because they confuse motion with progress. China built the most efficient economic machine in human history. And now that machine is eating itself. If this changed how you see the world, do me a favor. Subscribe to Monetary Archaeologist, because the past is full of buried treasures and financial disasters, and I'm here to dig them all up. Money leaves clues. Empires leave warnings. And right now, we're watching one of the biggest warnings in modern history unfold in real time. Don't look away.